The Dancing with Depression podcast is brought to you by CAS-CM, where CM stands for Content Matters, because content brings people together. Welcome back to Dancing with Depression. I'm your host, Adam Turner. This is part 2 of the multi-episode conversation with Mark. In the first episode, you'll remember Mark shared the foundation of his story, where he came from, the path that led him into military, and the expectations he carried with him along the way. Today, conversation goes deeper. Mark talks about the contrast between active duty and civilian life, what that transition really feels like beyond the surface. He also reflects on what mental health looked like in the military 25 years ago compared to today, and how much has changed and how much hasn't. We also talk about something that feels especially relevant right now: the difference between real life and what people want you to see. Much like social media today, there's often a version of strength that's presented outwardly, while the reality underneath tells a different story. This episode is about that gap between image and experience, and what it means to carry it quietly. Let's continue the conversation now.
That's something like when you first go in, like 4 years seems like 40 years, to a 18-year-old or 20-year-old. And one of those great leaders, was someone that had that conversation when it came time to re-enlist. And preface, I got married in my first enlistment and started a family. And, I had 2 children. And being away from them, that was tough. I remember that 52 days, that we talked about earlier on the ship. I had left, Norfolk, Virginia on the ship. And then by the time I got to where we were going, that's when I found out that my, wife was pregnant. And so when that happened, that unit that we were in, I was able to leave that unit and go to the base where she was stationed, because she was actually active duty at that time. And I actually knew her before, before she went into the military. And then, the relationship kind of extended, and she went in and we got married and, moved to Beaufort, South Carolina, at the air station there near Parris Island. So when that first enlistment came up, the thoughts were, do I get out and join the sheriff's department and make nothing and can't afford the housing in that area? Or do I like what I'm doing? And most days I did. I enjoyed what I was doing. And, that leader, at the time, he was, shout out to Staff Sergeant Holman, who retired a Master Sergeant, was like, hey, stay in. And if you don't have anything lined up, not saying that there aren't great people that get out after 4 years. And, there's some bad people that get after 4 years that can't stand it. People that get tattoos right after boot camp and for the next 3.5 years can't stand looking at that tattoo. And it just so happens I have a Marine shirt on today and the Marine flag there. I'm not that guy anymore that I used to be 20 years ago, where, oh yeah, I was in the Marine Corps. And, that's not what I lead with. If military service comes up, I'll talk about it, but I won't even say I'm just retired military.
Mm-hmm.
But the career was not it wasn't, I was going to do 20 years. It was I'm weighing my options. And we had discussions a lot of times, a lot of times in the Marine Corps, you're working 16 and 18-hour days and, on little sleep. And, again, it's that mission accomplishment. It's not like you're getting overtime, you're there until the job's done. And, so you have conversations with people, and it's like, stay in longer so that you change the policy or, your leadership will be different than that person. If you don't like that guy, stay in long enough to make a change. So that resonated as well. Now corporate America, that doesn't always, you don't have that option, and so it's somewhat different. Like, God, like there's no way, like I think when I resigned the job that you and I were together, I think there were like 5 other people the same day that resigned. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not saying it was the leadership or the pay structure but, a lot of that had to play a small part, with everybody that was there, so
And I think part of that was the difference in corporate America. We saw where when people got into a position, it was less likely that they were going to fall out of it, possibly move up, even if they weren't qualified or good at it.
right.
It's just that's what their kind of mission became, was to continue to position themselves in a place of power.
And the thing about it that I saw most, especially in the area that we were, is the people that got promoted from within, the same things that they kinda complained about, like, it became, "Oh, this is now my money, and so it doesn't matter because now I'm getting compensated,
Yes.
from all of you people." So,
Yes. Yep.
it
Absolutely.
wasn't
So,
about the well-being of all the people they left behind, it was like they stepped on them to get up, a ladder or 2 you know, to have their life better than other people, so
and we're not saying that this happens everywhere,
no,
but
no.
it definitely happens. And I'm sure there's a few people that can relate in scenarios that they're in, or that they've experienced. You mentioned starting a family and essentially being away for a long time. And I know, and I've always known how important family is to you. So when you did finally retire, what was that like transitioning? I know it's referred to as like civilian life. Again,
Mhm. Yeah.
I that's how I know it.
Yeah, it's totally different because when you're in and, like, when I deployed with other Marines, we had the full support of, some of my best friends in the world. And you leave behind, sometimes a single mother status and they have no support. I mean, there's somewhat of a community, for the military wives that are or husbands, because females deploy as well, but there's somewhat of a support, but not nearly the type of support that, I had, with my best friends. And then when you come back, you transition into a civilian job and like, getting ready for this, I was like, okay, I got 45 minutes. Let me check the computer and let me check the sound. And then 15 minutes, I'm like, where's Adam? He's like, it's supposed to, like, I start to get anxious of, and then after work, it's like, wait, you're leaving? Like, what do you mean? They're like, yeah, like, we don't get paid after this. We're gone. And some people start leaving, packing up their stuff 15, 30 minutes before. And, I'm like, wait, like, what do you mean? Like, yeah, that's our scheduled, or scheduled time to be here. But, you know, and I was just like, wow, like people actually go home after, 5 o'clock or when they're supposed to. So those types of things were definitely different pivoting to civilian. And
Would you also, because I feel like in a small alignment, like in the field that I chose with regards to sales, it was easier to have a conversation with somebody that was in sales because it's not your traditional, I went to work between these hours and this is what happened, and then you shut it down. It's oftentimes always with you.
right.
I think the best and only way that I could imagine that is to multiply that by about 100. when you're talking about being deployed and the things that you have seen and experienced with those folks. The conversation you guys have, somebody might be listening on the outside, listening in and being like, what are they talking about? Because it's just a different, you know what I'm saying? Like, would you agree that like you might not even finish sentences? You might just make a reference to something. And did you find that to be true? And if so, did you find that your family, your loved ones wanted to know more? And it was kind of like challenging to not so much relive it, but explain it.
Yeah, even today, like, I had a conversation with my sister and she's like, "Well, I know you can't talk about things." And I was like, "That was 25 years ago. Pretty much everything that I've done's been declassified." But there were times that I couldn't. We weren't allowed to say, "Hey, we're deploying on this date," or "We're going here," or "We're going there." So, families know what they're kind of allowed to say and what they don't say. Now, that would be like you telling Bobby, I really can't discuss on, what we're working at work, and I'm not sure how that would go over for you, but I have a feeling that, within one look of like, what did you say? That, well, no, I can't tell because I can't remember everything. That would,
That would fly. That would fly. But I want to dig just a little deeper on this because I feel like there's a difference between knowing and understanding. And they might know because, you know, that's what they were told or that's what everybody says, but that might not help them through not being able to understand it. And the dynamics within a relationship where communication is important and did that, not to get into the personal weeds or whatever, but did that come up? Did you notice where they didn't like it?
oh, definitely. Like when we're deployed, there were people that went to the chaplain, like wives at home threatening, to do harm to themselves or going through the command saying, I can't do this, like he has to come home or she has to come home or even shorter, jobs or when you're not deployed, wives would go to, the command and say, he can't be there for this long. I have a job too. And, like we can't make it on one income. And those types of things were, common. And, the majority of those married military members, they know it, getting into it, but they don't know the impact that some of the things are going to happen, right? Like one of my buddies, like he was in during Desert Storm and he was coming back and he was short time getting ready to get out and he was upset that we were getting deployed. And he's like, I didn't join for this. I joined for the GI Bill. And, he was upset and he actually took his Kevlar helmet and hit his hand and several times and broke his hand a couple times, and he was in a cast and he was right there with us, walking with his rifle being deployed, but he had a cast on. So,
Wow.
even the Marines don't understand the total impact because he thought that he was too short to get deployed. But again, it's that mission accomplishment, he could still sit on a fence and with a radio call stuff in. So he was still, serviceable in some capacity that, like again, if it were civilian, he would just not go to work. And
Mhm.
and same thing for the wives. Like there are a lot of great military members that get out because of family, because they know that the tempo, the operation tempo or the deployment schedules are not very good for a strong family. And,
Mm.
looking back, there are very few of my friends from, that when I went in that are on their first marriage. So,
Gotcha. So I'm curious, I'm gonna phrase this a certain way because I'm gonna circle back. Not counting the last 10 years, okay? From the time that you retired to up to 10 years ago, how would you say or describe your, not your kind of coming back, but just in general, like if you were to talk about the Marines or if you were to talk to fellow Marines, or did you feel that you had experiences that you weren't able to figure out why you were feeling so, like, did you feel different? Or let me try this a different way. I was blown away by the conversations that we'd have. And what I mean by that is you saw things, you experienced things to whatever degree it was far more deeper than anything I've ever experienced, right? And I'm just curious, mental health now is something that's talked about a lot more. Would you say it was talked about then?
Yeah. Mental health was you're freaking crazy, right? Like you do crazy things. And the military always has their standard, after an event, like, hey, if you want to talk to the chaplain or if you want to, go further, like that was always offered. And
So there was a line of people to do that, right?
oh, yeah, I mean, a line of 0, and if there was one person, like, they're looking around like, "Who sees me doing this?" Because if you do that, and you should, like, there's things that people see, and probably today, it's looked upon a lot different because we've had the last 20 or 30 years of conflicts where these veterans are coming back and, 22 a day kill themselves. They commit suicide. The walking wounded, the organizations that have brought things to light. But back then, like if you did that, if you stepped into someone's office to talk about things, they took your gun away, right? Or you may have gotten an unsat fitness report to where like you don't get promoted because the mental capacity that you need is not there. The drinking in the barracks was like coping mechanisms for a lot of people, like to the point where alcoholism was very bad, but that's how a lot of veterans, dealt with some of the things. And not all of it was, combat related. It was being away from their family for the first time. It was maybe something happened in boot camp or you see things that are not necessarily what you want to see every day. But when you talk about mental health today, it's totally different because it's more accepted, but still, like if you're maintaining a security clearance, they're checking your bank accounts, they're checking who you hang out with. And if you want, to move into, 3-letter agencies when you get out, all of that stuff comes up. And there were times like, that I saw things that to this day, I still see it. Or, smells bring back certain memories that every week when I take my trash out, it flashes. But if you say that while you're in, then you're at a point where, maybe this guy's not stable. And maybe, especially for the career people that are looking to move up and, do 20 years and retire with a decent pension and retirement, that's where it gets tricky because it's the unspoken truth, so to speak. Some people may know that you're struggling by your actions, but some people don't want to know either. At least, back when I was in, and, of course, a lot of things have changed in 25 years. And then the other thing is like when you're married, and going through divorce or something, saying that, that there might be something off, that you need some help, some people may use that against you seeing your family, seeing your kids, custody battles. And, so a lot of military members live for their kids and to be threatened like, oh, well, you're this and you have nightmares and you wake up and, I know all this stuff and I'll tell the command if you don't pay, whatever child support I want, and so that's brought up as well. And so a lot of that goes unreported until, someone reaches the point where, my kid's 25 years old now, and, I don't have to worry about it. Or I've been through, 3 or 4 marriages, and those types of things don't get brought up in the mental health capacity until, you know, veterans are, and it's not just veterans either. It's kind of the same thing if you're in corporate America, or in Japan, people are committing suicide there because of the work-life balance. That it's not just our society, it's different societies in the world that, have the same thing. And mental health is huge. So when I saw that you were doing this, I was like, here's another avenue for to get things out to help people, and like I said before, I always knew you were a little bit crazy, but your story is it was like, yeah, like that's me too. Maybe to different degrees, but and like growing up, we saw it, with our parents or friends of ours who we thought were the perfect family. And I think we talked about this before. And then you find out, at your 20th high school reunion that those parents slept in different parts of the bed and only sat on the bleachers together at the games and then never talked to each other. And so, like, the normalcy that you think other people that you're comparing people to, you find out later in life, like, oh, me too. Like, that's, I've gone through something like that, but I thought it was only me. And
Yes.
when you're bringing light to a lot of these issues, and I hope you go viral and, you're the next Joe Rogan and you can talk to, well, maybe not Joe Rogan. Well, maybe, yeah. That,
I got the ball there.
yeah. Those things can be brought up, and it's almost the accepted normal now. Like, if you're talking to someone and you're like, "Oh, you don't have any issues," like, you must be crazy then if you're if you don't have issues.
Yeah.
So,
And I think that's a great point because I mention this all the time. I feel like generations like to compare and contrast, and there are differences, but there's also a lot of similarities. I think that they're just presented differently. So as you were talking about, the couple, the family at the game supporting their son, but then when they go home, they're sleeping in different beds. Like to me, that's kind of like the social media effect where we
mhm.
only post what we want everybody to know about, but they don't really know the behind the scenes.
Or if you do post the behind the scenes, then you're just sympathy.
Yes, looking for the attention, yes. And I used to joke about, like, the hour drive to my grandparents for a family reunion, and my mom and dad would be, like, not happy with each other and having an
Mhm.
argument, but the second we pulled up to the driveway, it
Oh,
was known that everybody smiles, everybody's
mhm.
fine, and we'll continue this fight when we get back in the car for the ride home,
Look,
right?
I'm
So those things happen and, like, aligned with different times that you grew up, but the challenges were still the same or
uh-huh.
similar, right? So one of the things that I wanted to touch upon and kind of allow you to guide me, but we talked about sports being something that tied us initially together, and my natural curiosity was another thing where I would ask you things. It wasn't about specifics like, what do you mean when you take the garbage out, you smell and think of something? It wasn't that. It was more general questions. As we close out part 2 of this conversation with Mark, I want to pause because what we talked about today wasn't simple and it wasn't theoretical. This was about real decisions made under real pressure. We talked about what it means to serve when you're young, married, starting a family, and weighing stability against sacrifice. About learning from both good and bad leaders. We explored the difference between military life and civilian life, where the mission doesn't end at 5 o'clock, where overtime isn't a thing, and where responsibility to others often outweighs responsibility to self. And we talked about how jarring that transition can be when you suddenly step into a world where the structure, expectations, and shared understanding are completely different. Mark also shared something that matters deeply: how mental health was viewed when he served over 25 years ago, not as something to be supported, but something to be hidden. How asking for help could cost you trust, promotion, or even your career. And how many people tried to cope in silence or not cope at all, because the risk of being seen as unstable felt greater than the pain they were carrying. What stood out to me wasn't just what Mark experienced, but how much of it was never meant to be understood from the outside. The gap between knowing someone that served and truly understanding what that service asks of them and of the people who love them. In part 3, we continue this conversation. We'll touch on identity after service, the weight that doesn't always leave when the uniform does, and why some of the hardest truths to hear are also the most important ones to say out loud. Thank you for listening and for having conversations that don't rush past the hard parts. We'll continue in part 3, and remember, when it comes to depression, take the lead. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Dancing with Depression. There's a saying that hindsight is 20/20, which is often used to describe the phenomenon of being able to see things more clearly after they've happened. With that in mind, I encourage you to reflect back on past experiences in an effort to better understand your now. Also, I invite you to share with me your comments, thoughts, or personal exposure to depression. You can email me at dancingwithdepression@yahoo.com. Until next time, keep moving forward, and when it comes to depression, remember to take the lead. The Dancing with Depression podcast may include discussions of suicide, self-harm, trauma, and emotional distress. Listener discretion advised. This podcast shares personal experiences and is not a substitute for professional mental health care. If you need immediate support, call or text 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. For non-crisis help and resources, contact NAMI at 1-800-950-6264.